Could the New York Mets swing a deal at this year's deadline with the Baltimore Orioles to acquire their closer Jorge Lopez and slugger Trey Mancini? Would that be the perfect final piece to complement this roster? On today's Locked On crossover, we're going to discuss what it would cost and if this trade makes sense for both teams.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Mets, Locked On Orioles crossover trade deadline special. This is Ryan Finkelstein, the host of Locked On Mets. You can find me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Got Connor Newcomb here, the host of Locked On Orioles. Definitely follow him. One of the best follows on the Locked On OB channel at Connor Newcomb _. And today we're talking Trey Mancini and Jorge Lopez to the Mets. Really excited about this one, man. A lot of buzz here, particularly with Mancini. But to me, where I want to start today is Jorge Lopez, because the separating factor, which makes this deal so exciting to me, is getting this reliever to pair with Edwin Diaz. Can you tell my audience a little bit about how good this guy has been this season?
Yeah, Ryan, I mean, he seems to be the guy that the Orioles bullpen is so interesting because they are the reason that the Orioles are, 47 and 48 as we record this and are in the AL wildcard race out of nowhere. They've had a top 5 bullpen in baseball, and Jorge Lopez has been the guy. And it's going to be interesting to see who the O's trade and don't trade out of this bullpen. But Mike Elias has definitely shown the Orioles GM that he's willing to trade a reliever at at his height because relievers are so volatile. But with Jorge Lopez, it's been dominance. And this was something that Orioles fans have kind of called for. So Lopez, he was with the Royals and the Brewers. He's a former top prospect with this really good stuff, but he could never figure out how to get deep into games. He was always walking too many guys. He was giving up too many home runs. And the Orioles claimed him off waivers in 2020. They continue to try to have him as a starter throughout 2020 and 2021. And all of last year, Orioles fans were saying, put him in the bullpen because of the electric stuff. So finally last September, they put him in the pen. He has 5 scoreless outings and then sprains his ankle and misses the rest of the year. And then comes into spring training, wins the closer job against some legitimate guys who have been relievers for 3, 4, 5 years now in the big leagues. And he's been dominant. He had one little blip. It was a couple weeks before the All-Star break in Minnesota. He blew back-to-back saves, gave up home runs in back-to-back outings. That is really the only time he's pitched poorly. A sub-2 ERA. It's a 99-mile-per-hour sinker that it gets a lot of ground balls. He's got a really, really high ground ball rate. It's not Zach Britton level that Orioles fans have seen. It's not Clay Holmes level ground ball rate, but it's 60+% ground balls. You add in, he's got a 4-pitch mix as a closer, which is really interesting. It's because this time last year, he was still a starting pitcher. Yeah. So he hasn't exactly figured out, maybe his 2 pitches or sometimes 3. So he likes to go to this big kind of get-me-over curveball. He'll throw it for a first-pitch strike a lot of the times. He's got a slider that's all right. I think if he turned it into a sweeper, it would maybe be better, but that's probably his 4th pitch. And then he's got a changeup, which moves the exact same way as his sinking fastball, except he throws it at 84 off of his, 99-mile-per-hour sinker. And he's 84, maybe more 86 at times, but
that's insane, by the way.
It's a great repertoire. He throws strikes. He doesn't walk guys. And that's how he's gone from, during the 2020 season when the Orioles had him in the rotation, he had the highest active ERA among qualified pitchers in all of baseball. Now he's a top 10 closer in the major leagues, and he's controlled through 2024. Now he is 30 years old, and this is his first year being good. But if the Mets want somebody to at least help him through the end of this year, I mean, this is their guy.
I mean, that's insane to talk about that difference between the changeup and the fastball velocity. That's showing you why he's been so successful. And you look at the Mets bullpen, they just don't have that extra guy. Like Adam Ottavino has been really good this year, but I don't think anyone really completely trusts him, walks too many guys, and there's just something missing there. Seth Lugo and Drew Smith have been inconsistent. They're going to get Trevor May back. That's going to be a big boost. But a guy that's missed almost the whole year, what are you going to get from him? Jorge Lopez, I think if we're looking at all the relievers that could be on the move, outside of David Bednar being on the table, I think this is the best guy with control. That's the big difference. You talk about getting David Robertson and some of these other names out there, Michael Fulmer, some of the other ones the Mets have been linked to, 1-year type deals. You got Edwin Diaz, who's going to get paid a lot of money after this year. I don't say that it's impossible. You got Steve Cohen that might pony up, but this is a guy that gives you a little bit of insurance, plus you have the control. That's why I love this trade. Trey Mancini is the other aspect of it. And I think that's the name that obviously fans know because, he has a big name being on the national stage, obviously with the cancer and just the home run derby. And, he's someone that's been out there. The interesting thing to me is I looked at his numbers, reverse splits this year, not drastic ones, but there have been reverse splits. He doesn't necessarily fit as that natural complement to Daniel Vogelbach, but I think that if you're getting Lopez and you get Mancini in this deal, to me, it still makes sense. But what is your take on the reverse splits this season and kind of his fit complementing Vogelbach in that DH spot?
Yeah, it was interesting to see the Mets make that move because obviously they felt like they needed just a much better version of Dom Smith, basically.
Yeah.
And, they were able to get a guy in Vogelbach who may never face a lefty his entire time.
I hope not.
In a Mets uniform, but he's been mashing righties this year. So it works perfectly. And the thing with Vogelbach is you're not going to put him in the field. So if you're facing a lefty starter, you're going to want another DH type. And I know that, JD Davis hasn't been the hitter that he's been at times the last couple of years. So, Mancini is not exactly the get him in here and he's, got a 130 WRC plus against lefties kind of guy. But you can also play him, at first base if you want to, give Pete Alonso a DH day. If you really need to, you can play Trey Mancini in the outfield. Now, he's not great out there, but he did start in right field on Sunday for the Orioles. He's not going to win a Gold Glove. He's not going to make the spectacular play, but he's going to catch a fly ball that goes to right field, and his throwing arm is maybe average at best, but he's not going to kill you being out there. So there's a little versatility. He just doesn't have to be strictly a DH. However, in terms of the reverse splits, it's been interesting. Really, the story about Trey Mancini as a hitter this year has been he's kind of been killed by the new wall in Baltimore. In terms of his expected home runs on StatCast, most of the year, he's had about 8 more expected home runs than actual home runs. I don't think anybody else has been above 4 in all of Major League Baseball for their difference between their actual homers and their expected homers. He's been hurt a lot by that new wall, that was 10 feet higher, pushed 30 feet back in left field at Camden Yards, but he's been mashing the ball, and his underlying stats are so much better than his actual stats are. I mean, he's got a 116 WRC plus coming into play on Monday, but that if he's playing in last year's ballpark, that would be better. I mean, there was a stat out there a couple of weeks ago where he was at, I believe, 8 home runs on the year, and he would have had 22 homers had he played all of his games at Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati. So that's how well he's hitting the ball and is not getting rewarded for it. Now, I will say, he's in an 0 for 20 slump right now as we enter play on Monday. It's 5 games. It's obviously not a big sample size, but it'll be interesting to see if this slump continues as we get closer to the deadline, how things shake out. But it's not like he's been bad against lefties. He's just been, a little bit better against righties. And that's because he's never been really in a platoon set. He's basically been an everyday player since he joined the Orioles. And, he's never been in that role of, you're just our lefty masher. So it'd be interesting to see if he got into that role, what it would play to. But, I mean, the other thing with Trey is, he's having his second best ever offensive season behind 2019. And, I mean, Buck Showalter loves the guy. Obviously managed him for 3 seasons in Baltimore. And it feels like a perfect fit. I personally don't want the Orioles to trade him. I think the return for an upcoming free agent first base DH who's 30 is not going to offset what it does to the clubhouse and to the fan base to trade Trey Mancini and just to the Orioles lineup. But if you package him with Lopez, that's what makes it so important. Because if you can package him with a 2.5 years of control dominant reliever, then you start to get potentially back enough that makes it worth it, which I know we'll get to.
That's a perfect lead into our next segment. A couple of notes before we get to that. One, that reminds me, we're talking about the ballpark of when the Mets made a ballpark at Citi Field that was completely against David Wright's swing. And it's just like, what are they doing here? So that's kind of an interesting note of it. And also, you mentioned the Great American Ballpark. I've been talking a lot about Brandon Drury. So it's kind of interesting to talk about that right there, that maybe Mancini, had he been playing for the Reds all year, I don't know if he has 22 home runs, but if he has 15 closer to Drury's 18, maybe this does make even more sense for this Mets team. There's also something when it comes to the Josh Bell rumors and the package that was offered there that I think leads right into what could be offered to the Orioles here that might make sense for both teams. So we're going to talk about the return in just a minute here. But first, whether you're ready to pop the question or if you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. There you can build the engagement ring of her dreams, as Blue Nile has simple tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, clarity, as well as setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind, so you can celebrate life special moments with fine jewelry, as they have jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Mets and Locked On Orioles listeners will get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. All you have to do is use the code Locked On. Again, that's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress free and find your forever peace by going to BlueNile.com today. All right, so getting back to the Trey Mancini Lopez to the Mets trade, there was a package that was recently floated. I talked about it on yesterday's show from Pat Ragazzo, who covers the team, and Michael Moreno. And basically, this is a standing offer the Mets had for Josh Bell. It was a starting pitcher plus a high-level minor league outfielder for Bell and a relief pitcher. Now, the Nationals don't have a lot of relief pitchers I would necessarily want. And when you think about that kind of a profile of a package, it lends right into David Peterson or Tylor Megill, who have both kind of ascended as being quality major league stars that you have control of. Plus, you look at the top of the Mets minor leagues, Khalil Lee and Nick Plummer are really the only guys that fit that bill. So I think you take that exact package, you move it over to this trade. And I think we were talking a little bit earlier about this. The one additional piece I think you have to throw in, because Lopez has the control, makes him more valuable than kind of Josh Bell and whatever reliever you're talking about. That would be, you throw in Willie Feñas as the guy I think I earmarked for you. Let me make sure I had him right exactly here, right? Yes, Willie Feñas. I knew it was Feñas, but I wasn't sure about the first name. But the Mets, they signed 2 international free agents prior to this season. Simone Juan, who I don't think they would want to give up on. And they also got this guy Feñas, who's a toolsy 17-year-old. So you're getting a 17-year-old kind of lottery ticket. You're getting a dependable starter. And then you're getting these guys in Khalil Lee and Nick Plummer, who for the Orioles, they can just kind of give them some at-bats at the big league level and see both these guys getting towards their mid-20s. Nick Plummer's already there. I think Khalil Lee is still 23 or 24. Guys that, they have the pop, they have the tools, but I think there's definite fourth outfielder risk with both of them, but you never know what happens with some playing time. So what is your kind of initial reaction to that type of a package for the Orioles?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the starting pitcher. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Orioles to go after a controllable young starting pitcher who is not necessarily someone's top prospect, but has been in the big leagues already, has shown that they can get outs at the big league level, but also obviously still needs some seasoning and, isn't exactly a mid-rotation solidified guy in the big leagues yet. And that's why Megill and Peterson kind of make sense. And for me, we talked about this off air that, I would be down with either guy for different reasons. I think Megill ultimately has a higher ceiling than Peterson does. I think at the end of the day, that huge build, I know he's already 26 years old, but big guy, I think he can put even more on his fastball potentially. And, we could see maybe a secondary from him emerge as a dominant pitch. I think for Peterson, what you've seen is he's got a really, really good slider from the left side. And I think he already has a really, really good slider. But the thing with Peterson is, he's got a 3-something ERA. I think he's been pretty solid this year. Will he get a lot better than this? Because we know, the fastball isn't anything amazing and the other secondaries aren't nearly what his slider is. So do the Orioles go for a guy in Peterson who you plug in the day you trade for him into your starting rotation and your rotation gets better? Or do you go for the Tylor Megill who, maybe, you're not relying on him immediately because his ERA has been a little worse, but you think down the road, you can get, your pitching coaches, Chris Holt, and your minor league guys with your hands on Tylor Megill, and maybe he gets better, down the road. So I think depending on what the rest of the package is, the O's could go for either of those guys. I think, you mentioned a 17-year-old from the Dominican Summer League. Mike Elias seems to like one of those guys thrown into every single trade that he makes because he is pretty confident in his scouts at the DSL to kind of find guys, and I don't think he's found a Fernando Tatis Jr. style, 18-year-old pickup yet, but he's done pretty well. And a couple of the guys he acquired in 2019 and 2020 in these type deals are already into, high A and performing really, really well. So, he's been able to do this a little bit with names like Gene Pinto and Michel Deson and others who are already in full season ball and playing really well, who he just kind of plucked at the end of deals as what we thought was a throw-in. And, some of them, including Pinto, turned out to be kind of the centerpiece of a trade for Jose Iglesias a couple of years ago. The one thing that I think would be most interesting is the kind of, guys who have cup of coffee, major league outfielders, more of AAA guys right now who are hoping to get to the big leagues. And the reason I say that is the one spot on the Orioles that could certainly be upgraded, but would take a really good player right now is the outfield. They have Austin Hayes, Cedric Mullins, and Anthony Santander basically every single day. That's your three in the outfield. And all three are performing, and all three are controlled for, 3+ more years. Now, I do think the Orioles may move Santander at this deadline because, he's got 2 more years after this. But the reason they may move him is because they have a guy in Kyle Stowers, who was their 6th-ranked prospect, who has been lighting the world on fire at AAA. He was the co-minor league player of the year with Adley Rutschman. You may have heard of him in the Orioles system last year. So they're ready to bring Stowers to the big leagues. And if they do trade Santander, Stowers literally plays his exact position in right field. And the O's think long-term his bat is better than Santander's. So the issue with a Plummer or, a guy like Lee is that, they could maybe assume a 4th outfielder role on the Orioles right now, but the at-bats are not going to be there to truly get a good look at them. Now, if the O's put them in AAA, they would play every day and they could really get a good look, but I think both those guys are at the point where they need the look in the majors and they don't need the look at AAA. So I don't know if just a, Peterson and a 17-year-old would get it done. So it would be interesting to see if Mike Elias doesn't want to go that route of one of those 2 outfielders, who I think the Mets will probably include in one of these trades when they're going to add a bat. I think, it just works out that way. That's kind of the perfect piece to add in these trades. Would, Elias go for another pitcher? Because I know the top 20-ish in the Mets system is very pitcher heavy. So it could be potentially going after, another one of these kind of mid-level arms in the system instead of one of those outfielders. And only because, the Orioles are not going to value a guy like Lee or a guy like Plummer, like even a team like the Nats would. If the Nats acquired one of those guys in a Josh Bell trade, I mean, that player would be in the major league outfield tomorrow.
Yeah.
For the Orioles, it would be tough because even, I mentioned those 3 outfielders. I mentioned Stowers, in AAA. The Orioles' current 4th outfielder, Ryan Mckenna, is very similar in terms of kind of prospect status. He's just kind of a year ahead of Lee and Plummer. He was a top 10 prospect. He was an outfielder, great defender, a lot of speed. The bat was up and down, and he got to the big leagues, and the bat just couldn't let him stick. But because he's so good defensively and with his speed, he's just kind of stuck around as the 4th outfielder. And so it'll be interesting to see, could it be another pitcher maybe? And would the Mets be willing to instead part with another pitcher to make this deal done?
Well, I think we should talk about that on the other side of the break here because I got another pitcher to talk about. And I also want to get into Peterson and Megill a little bit more because I do think that obviously is the main piece that's going to swing this. And which one would the Mets be more willing to trade in that scenario either? Before we get to that, though, welcome to the world of sports cards reimagined with the Sports Card Investor app. It's the hobby's most powerful resource where you can quickly check the value of your favorite cards, find great deals, and profit from the hobby you love. Available completely free in the Google Play and Apple App Store, the Sports Card Investor app is a must-have for baseball fans where you can easily browse over 630,000 cards from every sport with hundreds more added each week. You can check the latest values of your favorite cards with the 7-day or 30-day charts. You can find the best prices and buy directly through the app with their eBay deals feature. Whether you're interested in investing in prospect cards in the hopes of finding great deals on players who might just pop like some of the guys we're talking about right now, prospects who could end up really increasing in value. If you want to get nostalgic, go back in time and check out some cards from the players of the past. Download Sports Card Investor app today, which is available for free in the Google Play and Apple App Stores, or go to sportscardinvestor.com/locked on. Now, getting back to this trade, I want to start with the third piece, and then I'm going to circle back to Peterson and Megill. Here's just another name to throw at you. You got Mike Vassell, a guy the Mets drafted in the 8th round, 2021. Got a 3.41 ERA this year, 14 starts. He has spent the year originally in low A. Now he's been in high A, has not had great success in high A. 5.40 ERA there, 1.80 ERA in low A. But to me, it's almost a similar pitcher, maybe a little bit farther behind than when the Mets traded Kevin Smith to the Orioles for Miguel Castro a couple years ago. That's just an arm where, I don't know if the ceiling is super high, but you think like maybe he can be an innings eater starter one day. Maybe he can pop for you and be a little bit more. So if they want an arm, I think that's one way to go. As you mentioned, Khalil Lee and Nick Plummer are being shopped probably a lot in a lot of these different trades. I imagine Dom Smith and JD Davis are shopped in every trade. And I don't think either of those pieces would necessarily interest the Orioles with their kind of lack of long control that would fit their window and their lack of position that really fits with what they're doing. So if we're talking, two arms here in the lottery ticket, and like I said, that name on the lottery ticket, it's whoever the Orioles value, right? I just threw a name out there. It could be anybody. But what would you think about that piece added with a Peterson and a Megill here?
Yeah, it kind of makes sense with what the O's have done as well, a 2021 draft pick. When they made the trade of Dylan Bundy a couple of years ago and sent him to the Angels, they got 4 pitchers back in that deal. And a few of those pitchers literally hadn't even pitched in the Angels system yet. It was, they got them after the 2020 season. And, these were guys who were drafted and, didn't even pitch in 2020, or they were 2019 draft picks, but the Angels shut them down after the draft, didn't have them pitch in 2019. And of course, there was no 2020 minor league season. So they actually got multiple pitchers who never threw an inning in the minor leagues for the Angels. And, Mike Elias, I think, is okay with saying, okay, this is a guy that another team drafted recently. They got, a little bit of development into him. We could see a little bit more from what he looks like against professional hitters and then go after him. And, just reading the Fangraphs write-up on Mike Vassell, who I remember from a little bit from Virginia in his college days, Eric Longenhagen writing that he was actually a bigger prospect in high school and was potentially like a first rounder. And then I believe he got injured and had surgery and had to miss some college time. And so that's a guy who I could see the O's maybe liking because, hey, way back when he had this arm that people were salivating on and, he's dropped down some boards and, maybe a little bit of struggles with the Mets as he advances up. So that's certainly a guy, for Orioles fans listening, he's ranked 18th right now in the Fangraphs, system rankings for the Mets. And I believe Holderman was ranked ahead of him. So now that he's gone, you could jump him up to 17th in the Mets system right now. Honestly, Holderman would have been a guy who would maybe fit this mold right here had they not sent him over to Pittsburgh for Daniel Vogelback. But I think that's definitely something that Mike Elias would certainly look into, that kind of pitcher.
Yeah, and then so you get to the main piece here. Is it Peterson or Megill? It's interesting because I think if they were both healthy, I believe the Mets would be pushing Peterson a little bit more in this type of a trade because, like you said, Megill has this high ceiling. You're talking about a guy that has touched 100 this year, that has 7-foot extension. He's 6'7". I mean, Peterson's a tall guy too, but Megill kind of uses height a little bit more to his advantage. And I really do think that, not that I expect him to become a frontline guy, but you could still envision a scenario when that happens. With that said, he's been hurt. And as much as the Mets can hope that Jacob deGrom is going to be healthy for the rest of the year and they can just roll out a rotation of their veterans with Scherzer, deGrom, Carrasco, Bassett, and Walker, there's no guarantee in that. And Peterson has been so solid for this team. I don't know if they necessarily want to move him right now. 3.31 ERA. He's been so good. We talk about the slider and then, talk about the Orioles fans and the interest in him as well. That slider, a 47% whiff percentage on that pitch. He's putting away batters at a 34% clip with it. Suddenly, he's able to get strikeouts as a guy that was always more of a ground ball pitcher. He's a really quality starting pitcher. So I think the Orioles couldn't go wrong in this deal. I think either of them gives you what you would want. I'm curious where the Mets would go with it, but I think if we're just talking about the shape of the deal and what the Mets are doing at the deadline, Colin Holderman, really nice find this year, still a relief pitcher. Talking about a lottery ticket, I mean, those are a dime a dozen. Talking about giving up a prospect in Vassell that is good, but not one of their probably top 5 starter arms in their system. And then you're giving up, what hurts a lot in one of these starting pitchers, but for a stretch run to add a Vogelbach and Mancini as a DH platoon, plus, like you said, Mancini, a little more versatility than like a Josh Bell would bring to the Mets positionally. To be able to add a guy that's a legitimate lockdown reliever with Edwin Diaz, that's the big thing here. You're getting a guy with control that you can slot in, that can save games when Diaz can't, that can be the 8th inning guy. It makes a lot of sense for the Mets to have addressed all their holes heading into the deadline. And for a rebuilding team like the Orioles, I would imagine this trade does make a lot of sense to you as well.
Yeah, and the other thing on the Mets side is, at the end of the day, even if Peterson keeps pitching like this and he's got a 3.5 ERA, is Buck Showalter going to give him the ball in a playoff game? Obviously he's not going to get the ball before Max and DeGrom and even Bassett when they're healthy. But then you throw in Taijuan Walker. Rarely do you use more than 4 starting pitchers, in the postseason. Obviously Peterson helps you down the line. You're locked in a great race with the Braves right now. But, all things considered, would a lockdown reliever, as we saw on Sunday Night Baseball, the Mets kind of struggled to close out that game before. You really didn't want to have Edwin Diaz pitch in that game, as I'm sure the Mets fans listening know, but he had to get 3 outs. So is that plus another bat worth more than your 5th starter down the stretch with a team that has some pitching prospects in AAA, that can fill out that role next year, or even, the one who's not traded can fill out that other 5th role. So it'll be interesting to see, from an Orioles standpoint. I mean, I'm still sticking to my guns that unless the big time offer comes, I don't want the Orioles to deal Trey Mancini. It's actually interesting because Lopez has 2 more years after this, but I'd actually be more upset if the Orioles dealt Trey than I would with Lopez. A lot of that has to do with, thinking with heart and not head a little bit about what Trey Mancini has meant. And also, I don't know if you've seen Felix Bautista pitch, but the Orioles have an immediate fill-in at closer if they do deal Jorge Lopez. Felix Bautista throws 102 with the nastiest splitter you've ever seen. So they'll be okay maybe in that sense. But a deal where you get that controllable starting pitcher who is ready to be plugged into your rotation immediately. I mean, the Orioles' rotation right now hopefully will get better when DL Hall comes to the big leagues and some other guys get healthy. But you're looking at, these first 2 games against Tampa this week, Spencer Watkins and Austin Voth are pitching. And Mets fans probably know Austin Voth. I doubt they know who Spencer Watkins is, and they probably only know the really bad version of Austin Voth. That's what the O's are sending out there. And those 2 guys are pitching well out of their means right now, which has been great, but that's not going to last. So to get that controllable starter, and O's fans can dream about going and getting Tylor Megill or Pablo Lopez, or I don't think they're getting Luis Castillo, but, I don't think that deal is going to happen. A much more reasonable deal is to get one of these guys on a team like the Mets, who these kind of pitchers are a little expendable for, where they're going to help the Orioles a lot more than they help the Mets. And so I think if Mike Elias is kind of locked in on trading these 2 guys, if you're going to trade Trey, I would certainly package him with a reliever like Lopez, because I think you're going to get much more back than if you deal the 2 of them separately. And if the deal does look something like this, I'm going to be sad because Trey Mancini's gone. But I think my number 1 on the checklist of if you're trading Trey is get a controllable starting pitcher back somehow. And that would obviously check off that box.
Yeah, it would. And I think, the prospect of losing Peterson from this team, like you just mentioned, like it's the same thing with the Vogelbach trade where I was talking about Colin Holderman. Holderman been great this year. For this team, Vogelbach's going to have a much bigger role. The exact same thing comes into play in this trade. You still have a Trevor Williams to fill that 5th starter swingman role. Not as well, but you have him. You have Megill rehabbing to hopefully come back soon. You even have Joey Lucchesi also rehabbing off Tommy John. So there's other options for the Mets. You got DeGrom making his final rehab start. You got a day off after Thursday. You don't need Peterson in the rotation. Like you said, the Orioles would need him more. It makes a lot of sense. We will see if this ends up being a trade that comes to fruition at this deadline. That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets and Locked On Orioles. Make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can follow Connor at Connor Newcomb _. And, if you want to make something else your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects. Lindsey Crosby is our prospect encyclopedia, covered a bunch of stuff with the MLB draft, and of course, focusing on the stars of tomorrow, guys that can be included in trades like this one. So make sure you make Locked On MLB Prospects your second listen. You can find it available wherever you get podcasts.